Welcome back. For those of you who are just joining us either on the webcast or here in person, I'm Rebecca Winthrop. I'm a senior fellow here at the Brookings Institution, and I run our Center for Universal Education. And I'm really pleased to be able to share the stage with three wonderful panelists. We are kicking off the second half of the symposium, which is really focused on the resilient people piece, the education and skills development piece. We are going to start off with looking at K through 12. And what does this idea of resilience and the future of work mean for schooling and schools here in the United States? And I'm really happy to have joining us Justin Rydstrom, who's the CEO of IDEA Public Charter School. You have full bios in your packet, so I'm not going to go through all the wonderful things everybody has done. Ed Hidalgo, who is the Chief Innovation and Engagement Officer of Cajon Valley Union School District in Southern California, and Esther Kerr, who's a senior fellow here at Brookings with us at the center. We've carefully sat girls on one side, boys on the other. So let the games begin. No, I'm joking. One of the topics when we were thinking about this issue, this topic about the future of work, how you have to sort of marry the conversation around economic development and job creation and what you can do in cities and places like what we talked about in this morning. How do you marry that with education and skills development and talent development? And I would say that the first thing that usually pops into people's mind when they hear about sort of education and jobs or education and future of work, people think of high school, preparing kids in high school. They think of technical and vocational education. So Justin, I thought we would start with you. You lead charter school here in the district. It was, I hope you don't mind me saying this, you well know this, and and it bodes very well for you, but in 2012 it was, I think, the worst performing high school in the district, pretty close to the bottom of the barrel. But now it's in the top 10, in large part thanks to a lot of your leadership, a lot of the team you've brought in place. I think it would be really helpful just to tell us a little bit about IDEA Public Charter School. Who are the kids? What are you trying to do? Give us a little lay of the land of education in Washington, D.C.
Sure. So actually, there was a really great slide that Jim Shelton had up for those that were here this morning, and it showed sort of D.C., showed the country, and then there was a focus on D.C., and you saw on the map the Anacostia River and a large red zone, largely on the right of that. And I was talking about essentially the lack of opportunities as measured by being able to do better than your parents, and that is largely who our school serves. We're located in Ward 7, in the Deanwood neighborhood. We serve about 325 students, and we're 98% African American, 2% Latino, and the vast majority of our students come to, when I say vast majority, I mean 82% of our students come to us reading below grade level in the 9th grade from over 30 different middle schools, and 95% of our students come to us below grade level in math. And the average reading level for our incoming 9th grade class this year was 5th grade, and the average math level was 4th grade, and 30%, full third of our students were below the 3rd grade level. So I mean, you're talking six grade levels behind coming into high school. So that is a kind of a snapshot of who we serve. Half of our students are on SNAP benefits. Another third are on welfare benefits, and another third are, well, some of them overlap, of course, and another third are overage and undercredited in high school, and so that's
who your kids are. Give us a little. How unusual is that and maybe it's really back to the picture that Jim showed in the morning of two DCs, one sort of wealthy and economically upward and socially mobile, and another not. Is that normal in DC? Like, what for the district, for this school district, what is sort of
So I think, unfortunately,
some of the average path?
As was discussed even on the last panel, it's unfortunately normal in too many of our cities. It's really a tale of two cities. In a lot of places, DC is not unique in that way, but it is normalized here. I mean, we're only talking about, the school is 7 miles from where we're sitting now, and the level of disparity is, honestly, I think unconscionable in our nation's capital.
And what's the percentage of kids who graduate from high school in DC?
Currently, I think the citywide average is somewhere around 70%.
Okay.
But I think one of the more important statistics that should really be looked at is only 16% of students that are in DC public schools, public and charter, are graduating from college.
16, 1/6.
1/6.
Only 16%. Oh my gosh, complete college.
Complete, and
Right.
that number is 5% east of the river. So in Ward 7 and 8.
5% of
5%.
kids.
Correct.
Wow. So those are the kids you serve. So if that's sort of your, the environment in which you work, what are you trying to do? What is Idea Public Charter School trying to do? What's your mission? What's your vision? Yeah.
So our school's vision is really to meet students where they are, as any good teacher in any classroom anywhere in the country does. But it's really to make growth, regardless of the grade level they come to us at. 40% of our students are students with disabilities coming in, and we want to make sure that we are preparing them for post-secondary success, which is our mission. And that success can come in a number of ways. And so while there's a lot of focus nationally, especially oftentimes with funding on College for All, it's also important to remember that post-secondary success, everyone can take different paths to get there. And it's really about meeting students with their interests engaging them in their learning, helping them understand the soft skills and the social skills that they need to be successful in any environment, and then being able to apply those. And so I think one of the things that makes us unique is the portfolio process that we use for all of our students.
What is that? Can you explain that?
Sure. So twice a year, middle of the year, end of the year, all of our students do a portfolio presentation, and that is in front of their peers, other teachers, in front of a panel, and they're presenting out on their progress for the year, and they have to show artifacts of what they've done well, something that they're particularly proud of, and be able to explain the concepts that go behind it, really explain their learning, and that is much more meaningful than a test score or an assessment, and so then they also have to speak about our guiding principles. Are you able to work collaboratively with others? Are you able to be prepared and on time? Are you able to celebrate others' success and habits like that that we call our guiding principles? And so they speak about all of those things, and it's a much more comprehensive picture of their skills and habits.
And you said you want to prepare every kid for post-secondary success. Now, there is a debate, a hot debate perhaps, with in the education community. Do we really want to prepare, should every kid go to college? Or should you think about multiple pathways? And I have to say, and this is just anecdotal, but it's everyone who I've talked to over the last sort of year and a half, 2 years, who said, look, we need to think about multiple pathways for kids out of high school. College isn't necessarily right for everybody, have had college degrees themselves. And probably their kids are going to go to college. And everybody else who I've talked to who have said, I really want my kids to go to college, often have never had the chance to go to college themselves. And they really see that as a path for upward mobility for their family. So you're sitting right in the middle of that. How do you deal with that? Like, what is your approach? How have you had to to come to terms with that big debate inside your school, like actively with your program?
So, like most conversations in education, I mean, there's no simple answer. One of the best things that I read on it recently was just a couple months ago. Nancy Huffman, Jobs for Our Future, talked about 10 things to consider when you're putting together a career technical education program, and it's really, equity is the same no matter how you're looking at it, whether it's your workplace, your school, your sector, and the fact is that so many jobs, whether you're talking about construction or concrete or iron worker, whatever the field is, so many of them are still dominated by white males, and there's still a need for equity in all fields, and there's still tons of room to grow. It's not our view is not careers. It's just careers, college and or careers. All kids leave with a college acceptance letter to somewhere, and so, but it might not be the most advantageous path for them to access that immediately. It might be helpful to work for a few years and get some experience, apprenticeship, and then decide, I'm gonna, that I really liked welding, and now I want to own my own welding business. And so they're more fit for that at the time that they are, and perhaps maybe don't incur as much debt. But it's really, I also think too, DC, only 2% of the students are in CTE programs, whereas nationally it's
CTE.
Career Technical Education. So, and that's the federal Perkins funding, but that's 2% in DC, whereas nationally the average is 37%. And I think it's really, that shows that we're doing a disservice for our students, the majority of which in DC are African American, about getting them into high wage, high demand careers.
Can you just tell us, before I move to you, Ed, a little bit about what are sort of the focus areas that students can specialize in or be exposed to, or?
So currently, it's construction and design, child development, and are the two primary ones that we have. Although we're actually at a really exciting time where we're revisiting that whole thing to make sure just that we're getting students into those high wage jobs, not just what happens to be a citywide initiative and so we want to make sure that by having all students go through sort of a virtual job shadow that they're able to do online with interest inventories, like we are able to help take that data and decide what do we want to offer moving forward. So one of the things we piloted this year was coding as a pathway to IT and cybersecurity, which is the kind of thing that we're much more excited about for our future.
Okay, great. Well, we'll come back to you, I'm sure, on this. But so, Ed, moving to you, again, zooming out from one school in DC as an example of what it means to bring the K through 12 space together closer with the Future Work Initiative. You're working at a district level, and you're working particularly at the primary level on this World of Work initiative. And you have come from the corporate sector. You've been in the workforce sector, working with adults for a long time, where there's lots of frameworks for career counseling and all that. You are in a lucky position of working for a very future forward-looking superintendent here, David Mirashiro, who hired you without any education background, really. Big risk, but it seems to have paid off. Tell us what you're trying to do and tell us what you're trying to do. Then I have more questions.
Thank you, and thank you for your work, and thank you to teachers and admins all across the United States. It is one of the hardest jobs ever. You would never set up a business like we set up our schools, where 40 teachers roll up to one principal. You'd never set up your manager in that situation, and yet we do that to principals every single day as GMs. The work at
GMs, general managers.
Yep. Right, yeah. So my work at Qualcomm really informs the practice and the work that I'm doing today. Having led contingent workforce and hiring been responsible for hiring more than 20,000 contingent workers, half of them that came from other parts of the world, importing labor into the United States, leading immigration, understanding TNs, Hs, Bs, and O visas, and then hiring out of schools like Berkeley, Stanford, and MIT, and realizing that many of those individuals, once they get on site, don't know how to manage their careers, don't know how to tell their stories. And it reminds me of the class at Stanford, Designing Your Life, how it's one of the most popular classes at Stanford. So these brilliant minds come to the corporation after a conveyor belt of education, but can't articulate who am I and who do I want to become? What are my strengths, interests, and workplace values? And when we then ask them, to manage their careers, they look back at you and they say, what does that mean? Because they're still expecting this ladder instead of this lattice that we've moved into. And so our career counseling practice was my first career dream. How can we help these individuals really identify and be able to have the skills to manage their careers? And so I had a couple of 20% time projects that really influenced the work. The second was a makerspace. See, my vice president would say, as long as you crush the core of your work, I'll let you do whatever else you want to do. So these 20% time projects came about. The second was this makerspace called the Think A Bit Lab. It was a dedicated makerspace for middle school students, grades 6th, 7th, and 8th, to come to the company, top floor, have experience with engineering and learn about the world of work. More than 15,000 students came to this lab over 3 years, became my full-time job. The vast majority of those students thought they were going to the stadium that was named Qualcomm. It's not funny. You're not supposed to laugh. So imagine me as I'm bringing labor from other parts of the world, understanding the gig economy right at its core, and that kiddos from our own backyard don't know that we're the world's largest fabless semiconductor company does its R&D. That was a problem.
And just to interject, give the audience a little bit of a sense of where Cajon Valley is located and who are the kids in that district.
So I got to meet Dr. Miyashiro. He asked me if I'd be interested in coming to work in the school district. Would it be possible to do the one-day Think A Bit Lab experience in each one of our schools for every one of our children? I spent a year working on the theory of change and theory of action at the University of San Diego because my career dream was really to integrate career development for every child, every grade, every year, starting in kindergarten. And so Cajon Valley is 27 schools, 17,000 students. We serve 22,000 meals a day. We're the highest poverty school district in San Diego. We have one of the highest number of Syrian and Iraqi refugees in the nation. We have students of high wealth, and we have students of high poverty. And every one of them has unique strengths, interests, and values that are needed in the world. That's what I learned. If you know anything about the Gallup Strengths Finder and you understand themes of talent, the kids in Cajon Valley don't have a different 34 set of talent themes than the kids in La Jolla and Encinitas or anywhere else. We need those talents. But we have children that have literally come, they've never been in school. By the time they get into San Diego, they've gone from refugee camp to refugee camp. They've never been in school. And we need to embrace them. We need to discover their unique talents. We need to build them and give them every opportunity to succeed in the world of work. What is the minimum effective dosage that it would take to help that child be successful for the world of work? That's our mission. Every child, every grade, every year. And it begins with the whole community. Everyone, parents, chief of fire, chief of police. It starts with our trustees. There's an entire ecosystem that needs to be brought into the mission in order to help a child be prepared for gainful employment. And that's what we talk about, gainful employment. Whether it's apprentice, 2-year associates, we've stigmatized labor. We need to find and identify every child's unique strengths, interests, and values and prepare them for the world of work.
And tell us how you do that. You talked about the Strength Finder.
Well, yes.
People might not all know what that is. What is it? And why would you want to use it?
We'll take one step back and say that we started with a career development framework that is called the mission of me. We believe that every child should be able to tell their story, and there's 3 core elements. Self-awareness is key, self-regulation is key, self-efficacy is key. Every child should be able to discover their unique themes of talent, their strengths, their interests second, and their workplace values. It's the self-awareness pillar. Secondly, they should have an exposure to both academic and career opportunities. How does a child aspire to a career they don't know exists? And thirdly, every child should be able to tell their story. based on those strengths, interests, and values, and based on the exposure they've had to the world of work and academic opportunities. That's the guiding framework. We deploy it in our classrooms through 4 core pillars of integration. And I did say in our classrooms, and I did say by our teachers, not at the end of the day, not at the beginning of the day, not by the counselors, by the teachers. The person who has 180 days to develop a relationship with a child, that loves the child almost as much as the parents, maybe more than some of our parents actually, sadly, or families. Every child gets the opportunity to explore a career, to simulate, to have an as-if experience, to meet a pro, and then to practice. In 15 months, our students have recorded more than 60,000 live industry chats with professionals. This is my question earlier to Mr. Shelton. If I was to invite all of you today to a 30-minute industry chat with our children in our schools, how many of you would raise your hand? Why aren't all your hands raised? You all came to this conference, right? Why aren't all your hands raised? I want all your names and emails at the end of this experience. But that's how we do it. Every child deserves to have that exposure and that experience. You can change the life of a child, and guess what? You don't have to get in your car or get in a plane to go do it. We can do it through Zoom. 60,000 in 15 months. Kindergartners talking to engineers. First graders talking to zoologists from Utah. Third graders talking to Imagineers from Disney, right from the classroom. It's possible. So that's part of the framework, and maybe I should just stop there. I get excited about it. So,
So other than collecting everyone's names and emails who raised their hand.
we'll message you. You got talent here,
Yeah,
Rebecca. You
yeah,
got
it's
talent in this
true.
room.
We have a whole new program, burbling up for the Center for Universal Education. Anyone who comes through has to do it.
An industry
30
chat, live
industry chat with children in
students.
Cajon Valley. But tell us a little bit. You said something really important, and people talked about it this morning. Scott Jensen talked about it. He said what did he say? The horizon. Do you guys remember what he was saying? When people are confined to their horizon of possibilities that they see.
Yes.
And he was talking about sort of workforce development in Rhode Island and their program, and that you have to have aspirations, and you have to be able to see yourself and see what's possible out there. And so that is what you said just now, that is part of what you're doing. Now, traditionally, when you think of K through 12 education and future of work initiatives, you've got a career counselor. In 12th grade, that was my school experience, saying, okay, you're almost out of school, what do you want to do here? I think I was supposed to be a beekeeper. I'm not sure. I think I like to be outdoors or something, but I remember being like, that seems odd. Yeah, I took some sort of survey. Not everybody has the school available that Justin talks about that sort of integrates, college and or career, but you're working also at the primary level.
Yeah.
Like, how do you think about exposing kids to the world of work in a way that doesn't foreclose what they could be, right? Because part of what you said you want to do is raise their aspirations of what is it possible. If I'm a kid in poverty, I've never, if I didn't even know that a massive company like Qualcomm was in my backyard and I could work there, and here you are, one of the things you just said was rather than cultivating kids in Qualcomm's backyard to go work for there, you were recruiting talent around the globe. How do you, I'm repeating myself now. How do you expose kids to the vision of the world of work without them thinking that's a girl's job, that's a boy's job, that's not a job for me?
Well, we know, and Linda Godfredson's research out of the University of Delaware, and all that I'm speaking about today is very research-based, but Linda Godfredson has studied this work and the concept of foreclosure. You probably know Linda, right? So early as 7 years of age, girls start to say that's a boy job, not a girl job. There's some also recent research out of the UK, out of the Education and Employers Group. They've been studying 20,000 youngsters and looking at this idea of gender stereotypes. So I think it's often and early is a way to approach it.
Often and early what?
Exposure.
Okay,
Ideally,
everything.
Meeting people like you who are doing the work, ideally, best case scenario, right? So and I see a room full of ladies. I don't know what you do. You're in technology, you're in STEM, women, professionals. We had a group of young women in 7th grade who said, we want to meet an attorney, female of Middle Eastern descent. And we were able to source that person through this platform that we use. And I went and watched that session. And the attorney came in, she had her hijab on, attorney, Chicago, and these young ladies walked out of there standing tall. Like, I can do that. So there is something about seeing someone, connecting with someone. But the other piece is also that simulation piece, like trying it on for size. What would it feel like to do that? So to have that work-based learning experience in the classroom is really important, I think. And then those demonstrations of learning that really show what you've learned throughout those 4 experiences, the explore, simulate, meet a pro, and practice. But the research there's quite a bit of research on this. And the fact that a lot of students will see these entry-level jobs that aren't transitory, where you might look at the gas. So many of our kids don't leave their 5-mile radius. They've never seen the ocean. So as they see, what are the jobs in my community? Well, I see the gas station attendant, I see the cleaners, the liquor store. They don't see those careers as transitory. But the kids from other districts are like, well, that's just my summer job. That's not my career. Now, we do believe in dignity in all work, but unless you show and help a student envision that future possible self, which is the research theory that we're studying longitudinally, possible selves. You can look at Daphne Oyserman's work or Nadia Fuad's work. We want to build each student to have that vision of their future possible self. And maybe more importantly, we want their parents to see that there's a possible future self for their child.
Interesting. Well, we'll come back to that. Thank you, Ed. Esther, let's move to you. We've gone from sort of a school that's looking very much at college and career at a high school level, a district that's going back down the chain, looking at really integrating the world of work, just exposing kids to the world of work from, sort of kindergarten on up in the classroom. You have worked for a long time at a slightly different approach, which is really looking at education systems. And how do you prepare all kids in a system with a sort of broad set of competencies, capabilities, and skills they need for any path, which is a different, yet again, kind of a different approach. Can you tell us just a little bit about what you think K through 12 systems should be doing to prepare young people for the future of work?
Yeah, thanks. I was thinking as I was listening how very differently we come to very similar goals and needs. And the way you talk about it, Ed and Justin, is very humanising. It sort of humanises the whole education space, whereas typically my colleagues and I are working at system level, and we often forget that very real face, and so it's very valuable to hear it. So where we're working is very much at the same point, recognising that children need to develop skills and competencies or talents that are going to enable them to achieve what we all want them to be able to achieve. And those recognitions are being increasingly acknowledged by large national education systems. And so this is not just about the US, this is about the world. This is about national education systems globally saying, at the moment, maybe our education systems aren't providing exactly what we believe they need to provide for our children and our children's children. So how can we deal with this? And I'm talking about well-developed countries, high-income countries, as well as those with low income, that we're dealing with a very similar problem right across the globe. And a couple of years ago at Brookings here, we did a large-scale survey looking at over 150 countries, looking at their national education systems, and looking to see whether there was any evidence of an aspiration toward developing what we call 21st century skills, transferable competencies in their students. So in other words, We've heard this morning too about the workforce and the increasing need for people who can deal with non-routine activities. So not repetitive activities, but how can we equip our students to be more agile and more flexible? And given the fact that in our education systems, we have traditionally focused on standardisation, on correct answers to questions, how can we change this a little bit to deal with?
Did I say that out loud? Did I say that out loud? Sorry.
I'll come back to you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
So we really need to be ensuring that the way we teach our students starts to reflect some of these competencies that we want to see later on. And we also heard about looking at how we teach in the primary sector, the early childhood sector. And we often prioritise a lot of the social and the cognitive skills there that are valued very highly in the employment sector, but we absolutely ignore them in the middle years of schooling. And so how can we deal with that? So what we've seen with these national education systems is that I think over 70% of this 150 countries were very clearly saying we do value 21st century skills. We want our children to learn how to think critically and to collaborate and to communicate and to solve problems. So there's a very, very clear valuing of these sorts of competencies in a way to the future. But of course, the next issue is around how do you go about doing that? You know? So we've got a huge amount of movement toward it. The sorts of problems that you've just been outlining exist in many, many other countries in the world as well. And in many other countries, they don't even have a lot of the opportunities that we don't have here. And I understand you saying that not every school, not every state in the USA has equal opportunity, but even more so, there are countries that have a great deal less. So that's the first point, that these needs for education to deliver better what we need is a global recognition, awareness, and priority. And I think we're past the time for talking about we need to change things to how do we go about doing that? And so that's the sort of work that we're involved in now.
So that's the perfect second question. How do we do it? What should be done?
We teach them how to think. That sounds terrible. I don't mean that none of us have been taught how to think. I mean, obviously, we're all thinking in this room, I hope.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
Quiz. There'll be a quiz at the end of the session. No, I'm joking. Yeah.
I think, though, in our traditional systems, some of us have benefited from our education systems more than have others. You know, for years, particularly in the years that I was in basic education, it was all the talk about the brightest and the best. Well, that's not where the talk is now. The talk is around sustainable development goals. It's around education for all. It's not just inclusion in terms of looking at people who have learning difficulties. It's saying that our education systems need to be able to help every student with what we might have called higher order thinking skills in the past, right? This is not the area just for those who are naturally advantaged by the genetics or the home environment. It's the education system needs to think that every one of those 30 or 45 or 60 students in the classroom all need to have access to these learning opportunities. And to do that, we need to think very differently about how we teach and how we assess, quite apart from what we put into the curriculum.
And so I want to pick up on that and just hear a little bit about, you know, how do we need to think differently about how we teach, how we assess, and how does that relate to the curriculum? But one of the things I wanted to do kind of a deep dive on across all three of you before we come back to that question, Esther, is all three of you talked about different sets of competencies that you thought were important. Justin, you brought up sort of this idea of, you know, soft skills, hard skills, and Ed, you talked about confidence and sort of engagement and presentation. We heard a lot in the morning session around STEM and around the specificity of particular technical, very specific skills for specific companies and corporations. But what you guys are talking about is a much broader range of competencies for young people to develop. Can we just do a little deep dive on that? Like, what are the competencies and skills we really think are really important for young people to develop in order to be prepared for the future of work? Justin, do you want to take a dive, and we can just do a little quick round robin?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the biggest is really, grit and resilience. I mean, the ability to bounce back from failure and try again. It's something that I think is so fundamental to anyone's life work. We've all experienced it, but so often if it's not something that you're coming from a family that has experienced tons of trauma and violence in your community, that resiliency isn't always there, and you don't have those things coming from home. And so I think that is one of the biggest ones, and I think that goes right into the other skills like confidence and poise and presence and some of those other things. But I would say that would be my number one.
We can't predict the jobs of the future. Naturally, we can't. Today we heard about bots, a lot about bots. The bot app store, which is really scary to me. And for that reason, I think that's why the self-awareness piece is so important, so that no matter what the jobs of the future are, you'll still know there's a place in the world for you, but it connects back to your strengths, interests, and values, because those are the talents that you'll use to be successful doing the work that you're doing, whatever it is that work is. You'll pull and reach back for those talent themes to get your work done, no matter what the job is. So if you can focus and develop on those talents, if you can understand your interests and they align to your workplace values, then you might find yourself in an environment, environment, and fit. You might find your place in the world of work where you're supposed to be. So self-awareness, self-efficacy, I think is key. Do I believe that I can accomplish that goal? Can I set a goal for myself? It's kind of a rinse and repeat model. The social cognitive career theory, I think, is a great framework for that element of self-efficacy belief. And then self-regulation, which I was hearing about yesterday from the VP of Education at a local nonprofit. The businesses say, well, yeah, our graduates, our interns can't sit at the table with other people and have a meal, and they're dressing inappropriately, and they can't engage properly. It was an interesting feedback. I'm like, is that really what you're hearing? Yeah, these kind of skills seem to be lacking, these collaborative skills. So I think those three with adaptability are super important.
What about you?
Yeah, I don't want to go actually for specific skills,
Yep.
not surprisingly. But I think there are two big issues I'd like to raise. One is, what is a skill? What is teachable and measurable? So if we think about grit and resilience, are these skills, is the first question. And the second question, and it includes then self-awareness, self-regulation and the rest, to what extent is it possible in a basic education system worldwide for teachers to be able to ensure that learners can learn these competencies? I'll call them competencies to get away from the skills. Because this is, I mean, more and more, and as we see changes in education systems espousing competencies. We see it in South Africa with their competencies under the R to 12. We see it in Kenya with their 7 competencies. We see it in the Philippines with their 7 competencies. We see it in Australia with theirs. All of these around, let's equip the students with all of these different competencies or skills. And then we bring in issues like self-awareness, resilience, grit, confidence. Are these skills, or are these the outcomes of the development of skills? And so I think we need to think very, very carefully in our education systems about what do we focus on in order to get to the end point that we want to get to. In India, of course, we also hear about the happiness curriculum. So they want every child to be happy. Well, you can't teach a child how to be happy. You need to equip them with the competencies and the characteristics that will enable them in the long term to be happy. So let's think very carefully about what are the teaching and learning goals that can be picked up in an education system by teachers in normal classrooms, such that then these lovely outcomes to which we're all aspiring will occur. So it's a matter of what do we focus on in order to get to the higher goal.
And what's your answer to that, Esther? And I want to add one more thing, which is we heard in the morning, and I can't remember which speaker it was, who said, there was a statistic that 30% of African American kids in the U.S. Went to a high school that taught calculus. So nobody has mentioned yet here sort of basic calculus. Grit, resilience, self-awareness, calculus? No. So how do you combine?
Yeah.
I mean, I have my own answer, but this is a topic of much discussion. Maybe Esther, well, anybody, the academic piece as well as sort of these other sets of 21st century skills or competencies that you're looking for.
If we think about something like calculus, and actually like Ed here, I have no education in calculus. I'm assuming you don't because you said you had no education.
I have
right?
no education.
You're wrong.
Yeah. So for me, calculus would be about knowledge, about
Right.
learning that particular content domain. And normally we would have a teacher who's majored in that at school and in college who then learns how to teach it and teaches it. When we're talking about students learning how to collaborate and to communicate, well, the teachers haven't gone and done a course in how do you communicate with others and what's a good way of collaboration. But nonetheless, we're expecting them to be able to enhance the abilities of students in their classrooms. So how do they do that? One answer would be we would like to ensure that the teachers have the capabilities to model the sorts of skills that we're looking for, because in the teaching process you can be modelling your communication, your interaction, your problem solving, your openness, your readiness for abstraction, all through your teaching process. And we've all met teachers who do that every day. So the challenge for us is how do we help all teachers to be able to teach in a way that models the sorts of competencies that we're aspiring to within our children.
Yeah.
And what I know you're working on that topic here at Brookings and around the world with other colleagues with formative assessment. Do you want to say a little bit about how that could be a tool to help teachers model?
Yeah, sure. So as many of you know, formative assessment is really just the use of assessment in a way that helps to inform the teacher how to keep intervening with the student. So that formative assessment can be formal or it can be informal. So informal formative assessment is precisely what I'm engaging in to some extent now. Some of you, when you nod or you smile, I take it from that you're understanding where I'm at and that therefore I can keep talking in the same way. So very typical sort of iterative procedures that we use all the time. And that's the sort of process that we would like to see that teachers can engage in around encouraging these skills in classrooms on a day-to-day basis. Yeah.
Justin, tell us a little bit about the teaching and learning experience for kids in your school, in your classroom. You talked about grit and resilience, but do you offer calculus?
We have a couple of kids every year that usually take dual enrollment calculus at UDCCC.
That was a small joke, but tell us about, what is the how do you interweave these academic knowledge with sort of 21st century pedagogy?
I mean, I think the most important piece is just that it is always student-centered. So that's the basis essentially behind formative assessments is that, you're just what I spoke about at the beginning is that we're meeting each student where they are. One of the panels this morning spoke about how challenging that is based on numbers in Education Day and a typical teacher load. I think one of the ways that we do that is by ensuring that we have a very low student-to-teacher ratio, especially at the high school level. A lot of times there's 2 teachers in the classroom for grades 9 and 10. and that'll be with 2 teachers and 15 students. So it looks a lot of times like an elementary school classroom where there's centers and there's movement, and it's not what you typically might think of as that high school classroom. It's much more interactive and dynamic. And then I think another piece is just making sure that the whole point of the career investigation, whatever grade you started in, is that you're really exciting kids about their future. And once any individual has that sense of, this is where I'm headed, this is my plan, and they are able to see themselves in that space, whether that's college awareness, whether that's career awareness. It is what oftentimes becomes the motivator for them. So just lots of exposure to a wide variety of things. So we regularly do things like workforce Fridays once a month, where in the cafeteria, all the lunches, students all around the perimeter are people with different jobs. So there might be a veterinarian there with some animals, or someone from a technology company. And just exposure to something that they don't see in their neighborhood. I mean, we're talking about a neighborhood that has one grocery store, to serve an entire ward, whereas other wards in the city have 7. So there's not a lot of exposure to some things that we all take for granted.
Great. And we're going to turn to the audience for questions in a minute. But just last question for you. You, on this topic of sort of integrating the world of work initiative and that whole sort of idea of, you talked about self-awareness, you have worked on a program across the district that integrates this into the curriculum. How do you do that?
I think that's when it works best. Obviously, it's when it's an integrated process, and the teachers can see that a 3rd grade realistic career is a forester on our careers grid. By the time students finish 8th grade, if they have started with us at kindergarten, they'll have experienced a minimum of 54 World of Work experiences. So the forester is one of the careers. And when you simulate being a forester, you use math, you use research skills, because in the forester lesson, City Council has asked your class to research 5 or 10 different types of trees that they would like for you to plant in the city square. So they want to understand which would be the best based on our climate and geography. And so which are your recommendations? You're going to actually present this back to the City Council. And so the students are using math skills, they're using presentation literacy skills, they're reading, persuasive writing, etc. So when the teachers see, everything rolls up to the career, it's not another thing. This is actually the thing. This is the why. So when teachers get this question all day long, it's like, why am I learning this? It's like, this is why you're learning it. You see all of these skills rolled into being the forester today. And that's what we're doing. We're preparing you for your futures. And, Mr. Coleman, I really enjoyed being a forester today, is what they say. And I'd rather not go to lunch. Can I go out and measure some more trees out in the back? So the students can do way more than we think they can do. It's usually the adults getting in the way and putting the pause on their learning. They want to go further. And when they start to discover their interests in particular, because we use this interest typology that Esther was going to mention as well. But you should all leave knowing what the Holland-Ryasek framework is, because interests have the highest correlation to career success, performance, and income of any of the personality measures based on meta research. James Rounds, University of Illinois. Rong Su, University of Illinois. So wouldn't it make sense that we connected students to this typology of interest called the Ryasek? And the ONET classifies 2,000 careers on the ONET by the Ryasek. Some of you maybe know it, some of you don't. But our teachers are able to create this common language now with students in the classroom as students are understanding their 6 Ryasek themes. And they're on this project, and like, we don't have anyone with the social theme on our project. Stacy, will you come and be on our project with us? We need someone with social themes that can train others how to do this project. We didn't ask them to do it. The students are starting to do it on their own. They're making these natural connections and kind of loving their classmates in new ways because they see like this really interesting value in a classmate that's investigative, who uses math and science to solve problems, that uses conventional, their themes, to organize facts, data, and figures. And like there's this beautiful research theory from the late 50s that most educators aren't familiar with. That's called the Holland-Ryesack. And so we're using that to create a common language starting in transitional kindergarten. And students can self-report their interest themes and not get boxed in. We're not tracking kids. Love all your themes. And one day you'll take a valid and reliable scientific assessment to be able to go a little bit deeper to understand, which themes am I really? And then you can start having a conversation. Where can that lead you one day? Let's talk about post-secondary and career.
Great. I see people writing down the RISEC framework, and you might have to give a source in a minute. But let's go to the audience. Just raise your hand. We have mics coming around. We'll start on this side. We have 1, 2, 3. Here we go.
Hello, my name is Michael Shea. I've been to the Think a Bit Lab over in Northern Virginia, and I think it's a partnership with Virginia Tech. I think the middle school students don't necessarily think they're going to Qualcomm State, they think they're going to Blacksburg. That's probably the problem. But when I've been there in the makerspace, and you talk to the people that design it and teach in it, they don't talk in career terms. They talk in terms like they want the space to look like an art supply store and an electronics store had a collision. And this whole space is now available for creativity and problem solving and collaboration. So my point is that to a certain extent, there's a way to sell this that is in very non-career ways that's just kind of fun and it's learning. And I think a lot of parents who maybe don't connect with, the idea that everyone has to be about a career, I think it sells that to them better. So I'm wondering, to what extent do you find that you can connect with people by just forgetting the career steps and talking about this is just fun?
Great. Good question. We had Stephen right here.
This one, Stephen Turnipseed, I'm again with Pittsco Education. I have an industry background. I have a very sordid background, but Rebecca's promised not to tell anybody.
Diverse, eclectic.
Eclectic, there you go. Well, some people call it sordid. Anyway, this is primarily it's probably more to Ed than anybody else, but everyone's can certainly chime in on it. I think the big gorilla in the room in education is that the gifted leadership is what's required in order to actually make change in education. And when the superintendent goes, so does the leadership, and then you don't have there's no scalability. And we see it so often happen. Do you see any mechanisms that can be put in place to support the scalability of programs so that, because you certainly can't go everywhere and hire eds everywhere. So how do we create a sustainability effort within education so that these kinds of things that we know work can have the lasting effect? So as Rebecca writes in her book, so that it doesn't take us 70 years to get all children, all means all, to the same level.
Great question on scaling. And David, I might turn to you on that question if I can put you on the spot. Yeah, go ahead. And then we'll loop back around to other questions.
Well, thank you for that. I think we've designed this program for scale, and we've received lots of philanthropic donations to help other districts do the same work. And really, it's just about community engagement, because when you ask your Navy admiral, your police chief, your fire chief about what you want the school system to look like, and you lean in and listen, and they tell you to stop stigmatizing the most important work in the community, especially the armed services. We want people to aspire to that, not see that as a fallback. Then you start to look differently about what types of skills, knowledge, and dispositions. And then I think that networking and research and data. So we're measuring this work longitudinally with University of San Diego in terms of education to employment. And when that data starts to reach publishing journals like Brookings, then I think others will see is we should do that too.
And how do you get, David, this is really unfair of me to audience volunteer, but you are superintendent and you are leading a large school district. So how do you get to solving the problem that Stefan raised, which is if one day, never leave Cajon Valley, but one day you leave, will your programs live on? And how do you ensure that happens?
Honestly, I got to work with the California Department of Education for 18 months to help them implement computer science. We opened the first 2 computer science magnet schools in the country 8 years ago before code.org. And then asked to serve on this committee for 18 months, looking at the governor, the legislature, California Department of Ed, and State Board of Education. I was screaming my head off for 18 months telling them adding a new layer of standards and not changing the system is not going to work. And I was censored. They wouldn't let me speak at the state board meeting because they didn't want me to speak out on the system isn't working in California. And so we went back home and I shared with our board, we have to do it ourselves. We have to create new metrics, new measures, and really do education to employment, gainful employment, and we have to create it ourselves, and that's what we're doing.
That doesn't give me hope for scaling. Other questions? There's some here. I'll get some women in here. Eliza on the end of the on the aisles. I mean.
Thanks.
And
This
then
has been a
one
great
down
panel. I'm Eliza Erickson from Omidyar Network. This is for particularly Ed and Justin. How do you find your teachers? How do you retain your teachers? How do we scale an initial educator development system to scale your school models?
And then there's a question here on the aisle. Right here. Whoop. Yep.
Hi, I'm a veteran, 18-year secondary math educator with highly at-risk youth in a high-needs district, and I'm wondering if our metrics aren't measuring grit and resiliency properly, because it takes so much grit for a kid to get up and get to school when there's no food in the house, or if they don't have a parent to come to school. So do we need different metrics to address grit and resiliency? And does our education system value those skills that those kids have and translate them easily with scaffolding into the workforce? I think all we have to do is show them a way to get there, and they'll get there quickly.
And I think there was right here. Yeah, another question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope this is an appropriate question, but and
We don't censor here, Brooke.
Okay. All right.
Not the California State Board of Education.
Okay.
Seriously.
I am going to get in so much trouble. Next.
We won't go there.
We love California. I
yeah.
take it all back.
I do
Yeah.
too. But since we have somebody from I really appreciate charter schools and what they're trying to do. But are we setting up a competition between charter schools and public schools? And I don't want to bring politics into this, but you have to. It looks like there's a big movement more towards charter schools at the expense of public schools right now. Can we address that just a minute?
Yeah, absolutely. And there was another question, the very first question, which I failed to have you guys answer. So I'm going to turn it over to you. There was a question around, the very first question was around, is there a way to engage with kids around some of these workforce, your RIASEC framework that's just more about fun, or is fun and enjoyment a piece of how you would do it? Or Esther, I guess that would be for you too, if you think about teaching and learning. Question around charter schools, teachers, question around measuring grit. So any of those are open to the floor, whoever wants to take what.
Well, I'll just go in very quickly on the fun piece. Of course, there's no reason why education can't be fun. And that's just about making sure that what you're teaching is something that the students want to learn and that you find ways of engaging them. I think it's very, very straightforward. And we see great demonstrations of that every day. And I guess that means that we need to help support teachers so that they actually feel that the teaching is fun. And I realise that you don't have fun every day of the week, but it should be an enjoyable process. It's a natural thing for us to want to acquire information, to learn to be competent. This is all just part of being a human being. So it should just automatically be fun.
So I'm going to jump in there because I think that's where we get it wrong most. Is unfortunately, there's so many layers in education, and it was talked about this morning. Is we don't prioritize education nationally. It's way too complicated at the state, local, state, and federal level, and there's just way too many players that are involved, and there's way too many overlapping politics and priorities, and that doesn't allow teachers to have fun and to teach. It doesn't come by having more standards, more layers, and at the end of the day, we are measuring the wrong things. To answer your question, I don't think there's any teacher that thinks that the metrics that are on the Park exam or Smarter Balance are, this is really testing what my kids need to know, and we're not testing any of the skills that we talked about here today. And then finally, just to answer the question about competition between charter and public. I think there is a competition, of course, for seats, buildings, everything, except I think it's also healthy. I mean, I started teaching in 2002 in Ward 8, down at the intersection of Malcolm X and MLK. I don't think that my 3 children, who are all in elementary school, would be attending DC public schools if charters weren't where they are now in the city. I think they have honestly pushed in the district DCPS to a much stronger, more robust system because of its competitive nature. And it's in the city, it's about 45-55 now. And I don't think either side is, I think everyone's fairly comfortable at this point with 50-50. And I think that I don't think there should be a monopoly. But I also don't think that, I think that the creativity that has come through and innovation that comes through a lot of charter schools and autonomy. And then to answer the final question from there, so part of that has allowed me, I worked in large school districts, Durham County in North Carolina, and what we have been able to do is match DCPS's pay scale, and that is something that is within my control. Now we're retaining 90% of our teachers this year. After this is my 7th year, it took a long time to get there, but this is going to be the first year that we're going to retain 90% of our highly qualified teachers, and it comes through allowing them to have fun, enjoy what they're doing, and have a lot of autonomy to teach their craft.
Question, Ed? Any of the other questions?
On the
Teachers.
Think a Bit Lab question.
Think a Bit Lab.
Last year, I worked with a now high school student who was a middle schooler, came to the Think a Bit Lab. He pulled the culinary arts career card. We had a turnstile with career cards, lots of them. He took the strong interest inventory, the super strong, when I was working with him last year, and the career that came back was culinary arts. His parents wanted him to go to Think a Bit Lab to go into bioinformatics. He didn't want to go into bioinformatics. His interests don't align with bioinformatics. So careers are fun. Why do we take careers out of the conversation? We should leave it in, is my opinion. The Think a Bit Lab was started around the world of work first, but I had to sell it from a STEM perspective because STEM is sexy and it gets the money. Unfortunately. But the career piece is what made the difference in kids' lives and changed the parents' attitudes. Teacher talent, thanks to Dr. Miyashiro and the work that we're doing, we are doing R&D work in our district. Now we have the longest line for teachers when the HR department goes to recruit at the County Office of Education, not the other districts, which is all a sign of the brand that we've created, the employment brand that we've created in our district. Teachers, principals, we're overflowing with talent that's applying for our jobs, which is a great problem to have when you build a talent brand. And I was trying to explain to Dr. Mishira how difficult that is. Companies spend millions of dollars to develop an employment brand, and in 2 years since I've been there, 3 years have flipped the whole employment brand for this district because of his work. Charter schools, I think if done right, we're for them. That's another opportunity for R&D, and we should compete. And let's compete. Let's get in the mix. Let's do it. Let's do good work, great work happening. And we need to get better on the metrics and what data we're tracking for sure.
Yep. I want to come back to the scaling question, but Esther, do you have anything else you wanted to add? So I'm worried about the scaling problem here, and the fact that what if David leaves Cajon Valley is like nobody else, like what's going to happen is he's been there 7 years. That's a long time for a superintendent. What's the average length of stay for a superintendent in the U.S.? 3 years. 3 years. Ugh. So you're doing well. There is a problem with scaling approaches. And so, Justin, so I'm going to ask each of you a question about scaling, but one about sort of at the national level, how would you scale? And maybe that's your alignment question, Esther. And you, Ed, about like how you how do you bring these approaches to other school districts? But Justin, we were talking in the break before about scale. And you're a charter school, you've got funders, and you were saying, look, I think actually some of the philanthropic community does not understand scale as well as they should. And could you share with us what I hope I'm not getting you into trouble. So much trouble on this panel today.
There go my chances to ever be hired by a charter management organization.
I can change the question if you want, because I do want people to
it's
come
okay.
back to Brookings and be
okay.
on our panels.
Well, I mean, I think, the charter management organizations today, it's not dissimilar from districts. I mean, you end up with essentially another district, just albeit national, with different regions, and the mergers and acquisitions and all of that becomes part of a business. I think the biggest challenge is then also once something grows and is large, it becomes too big to fail, and whether that's the largest in the district, the largest in the state, the largest organization in the country, and it just goes back to my earlier point about monopolies, is that we have to make sure that nothing is too big to fail, and that the other piece too is the politics. I think when I've also been in the school for 7 years now, first as a principal, now as a director, and that's rare. That shouldn't be rare, but I think the reasons that people leave is because of the shifting priorities. It's okay, here is this new assessment that's coming in that then trickles down to how that's being scored, and it's never a reflection of that individual leader or the work that is happening. It's it tends to be about some other priority. Usually coming from politicians or politicians that also don't agree.
That's a very diplomatic answer. Do you think there should be other idea charter schools in the district?
I don't. I think districts. I think it behooves the sector to go deep in what they do well. We have so much more work to be done. And can serve so many more students at our single site. And DC is of course blessed with geography, being a small space. So we can serve a lot of kids from around the city. I think too often what we try to do is we try to replicate everything and offer everything, and be all of that to everyone. Whereas if the more it's just like the inch deep versus mile wide argument, and which teachers deal with every day as they teach. It's not about teaching all of world history in 1 year, a formidable task, but we force that upon kids. It's you could teach any one unit in world history, and the kids have learned more about processes and historical questioning and reasoning than they ever have in their life. And so I think it's the same with schools in my mind.
Ed, you guys have done amazing work under the leadership of David, and you do have a really motivated workforce and fabulous teachers and long lines, which is good for you, but maybe not so good for the other surrounding districts if you're pulling talent. How do you think about sharing your lessons and scaling up the world of work to other districts? How are you doing that?
And we've been so fortunate to have other districts come and visit and then ask to do the work in their own districts. And so we're currently partnering with 10 others that are rolling out the world of work, starting in the earliest grades. And what I see in their wisdom is they always ask, can you start with the why? And it takes me back to when I first started in Cajon Valley, as I was interacting with teachers and started with training 900 teachers, went to all 27 schools. And I would ask the teachers, send me a LinkedIn so we can get connected. And the teachers would respond back, I'm not on LinkedIn, I'm just a teacher. And it wasn't so much that they're not on LinkedIn, it was more like, I'm just a teacher. So we really had to start with the why first, why LinkedIn is important to be familiar with, and also what's happening in the world of work and how it's changing. So what a simple Amazon Go video will do for a teacher who's never seen Amazon Go before. And then you say, yeah, you probably have parents who, if they saw this video, would be very concerned. But you should also know that this is where the world of work is going. This isn't the future, this is the now. I was just at Amazon Go 3 weeks ago. So as we unpack the why, so this is why we need to prepare students for this unpredictable future. We need to prepare every child to know there's a place in the world for them, that each of them has unique strengths, interests, and values that are needed in the world. And it's through what you're teaching in this classroom, this beautiful, wonderful classroom, and this common language that you'll be able to build out self-efficacy belief, that self-awareness, that will hopefully develop a possible future self in each one of them. So we always start with the why, and then really 6 months of Holland, of RIASEC, of focusing on developing that common language in the earliest grades. How do we use our protocols to help students self-report their interest themes? How to integrate it with like Charlotte's Web or the Lemonade Wars. Now I'm freaking you out. What are you talking about? Yeah, imagine that Wilbur is enterprising because he negotiated with the farmer in order to save the egg sack, in order to save Charlotte. So imagine building that metacognitive skill with a third grader. No, students can't do that. No, they absolutely can do that. And they do that. And in most cases, we didn't have to tell them to do that or ask them to do it. They did it on their own, which is even better.
Esther, what about you? At a national sort of system level, how do you think about, at broad scale, spreading this type of sort of breadth of skills
I mean,
throughout?
there's no doubt that charismatic leadership can shift things in the first instance, and that's great. But then you have to make it systemic. So when I think scaling, I really think about sustainability. So I'm not talking about size, I'm talking about can this continue? And when we're thinking about the changing learning goals, about equipping students to think creatively or critically or whatever it might be, we've got a change in learning goals there, not just to come out with knowledge, but to come out with how do you use that knowledge, how do you manipulate that knowledge. So that is a very different learning goal. And that means that what we need to do is to think not only about changes through the curriculum, we need to think about how do we align those changes with changing pedagogies? How do we align that with changing assessment techniques? And so these learning goals have implications and consequences for our whole education delivery system. And we need to move away from, unfortunately, reliance on the charisma and start putting in the structures so that it's understood that there has to be total alignment right across these different parts of the delivery system. If you only have a curricular change, your reform won't work, and we've seen that in many countries. If you put in change in curriculum and in assessment, it still won't work because you haven't looked after teacher support and pedagogies. So for sustainability and scalability, we need to be thinking a lot more critically about this being a wholesale change in our education systems.
Can you, and we have sort of 2 more minutes, but in closing out perhaps the panel for us, Esther, can you give us an example of a country or a place where you think they're making that type of shift?
Absolutely.
That's good for us to look towards.
Yeah. So I'll talk about maybe 3 countries if I've got time.
Yeah.
One is, we have colleagues here from South Africa, the Department of Basic Education. And in their grade R to K curriculum, they have talked about different competencies. And just in the last year or so, been thinking very carefully about the fact that they have gaps in their delivery and thinking very carefully about how do they deal with the gaps between what they've put in their curriculum and how then they get this actually implemented through their districts, through their teachers and through assessment. So that's one example of a country that's starting to look at those connectors. Another one, we can look at the country I'm very familiar with, the Philippines. They also put up, some of you might know the Partnerships 21 framework. They used that framework in their curricular reform in 2013. They put it through their curriculum, but they did not actually progress the skills through their curriculum. They just named them. Let's do problem solving, let's do collaboration. So you don't see a progression, an increase in skills. They didn't look after their teacher support at all. They've started putting into assessment. But now if we look at what's happening in classrooms, nothing different is happening in classrooms yet. All right? We look at Singapore, and they as in many ways, have made very good progress. They have made it both in terms of their curricular change, huge changes in their teacher practice, because they're very fortunate they've got one teacher institute, and so the ministry and the teacher institute can work very closely together. So this issue of alignment, about attending to each of these, is in very different states of play in many countries. But the positive thing is that more and more countries are aware of the fact that we do need to bring those strands together if we're going to affect the sort of change that we want to see.
Great. Well, that is it. Thank you very much. Please join me in saying thank you to our panelists.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.